Hollywood heartthrob Burt Lancaster seemed almost too good to be true. But 6 years after he died, shocking declassified FBI documents revealed the screen legend's deepest secrets. Burt Lancaster sent shockwaves through Hollywood when he rolled around in the surf in From Here to Eternity. His body was as tight and plugged as a modern underwear model, but this was the 1950s and men didn't do that. The rumors started flying. Was Lancaster gay? Attending debauched parties? Was he maybe even a communist? This handsome star said very little about his private affairs, but nothing stays secret in Hollywood forever, as you will see. Burt Lancaster was born at his family's home in East Harlem in 1913. His parents were both working-class Irish immigrants. His family life was challenging, to say the least. Like many youngsters from difficult homes, Burt Lancaster dreamed of running away to the circus. Eventually, he made his dream come true. With friend Nick Kuchia, Lancaster formed a duo called Lang and Cravat and signed up for the K Brothers Circus. Lancaster really came to life swinging on the horizontal bars, but life and finances were tough in the ring. The duo eventually started performing at burlesque clubs to make more money, doing their acrobatics between striptease acts. In 1939, Lancaster suffered a painful accident during a performance. The result was an injury that left his finger infected. Lancaster's doctor gave him a devastating choice. He could either give up acrobatics or give up his finger. The choice was obvious, but painful. The circus was Burt Lancaster's life, and it was all ripped away in an instant. Where would he go next? In 1942, things were heating up in Europe, and the U.S. Army soon drafted Burt Lancaster for service. Lucky for him, Special Services noted Lancaster's talents and signed him up to entertain the servicemen alongside such stars as Sammy Davis Jr. and Mickey Rooney. Sounds like a great gig after what he'd been through, but Lancaster's skills weren't fully appreciated yet. Burt Lancaster didn't actually do much in terms of entertainment himself. He says that he immensely enjoyed traveling Europe and North Africa as the person who turns the pages for the pianist. His job didn't quite use his entertaining skills, but it did help him turn an important page in his life. Norma Anderson was a stenographer who found herself stationed in Italy. One fateful day, their paths crossed. Anderson couldn't help but notice the incredibly hunky man turning the pianist's pages. She quickly asked a friend about Lancaster's availability, and the friend arranged for a blind date. The two soon fell in love. Lancaster returned from Italy with Anderson and seemed to be through with acting, but acting didn't seem to be through with him. One day, he was riding in an elevator to go see Anderson, and a producer spontaneously asked him to audition for a role in a Broadway play. Lancaster nailed the audition, and his performance caught the eye of another producer who wanted him to come to Hollywood. Even though Lancaster was completely unknown in Hollywood, he decided he wanted more than just a job as an actor. In an incredibly bold move, Lancaster immediately asked if he could produce films as well as act in them. Somehow, Lancaster's confidence worked, and the producer promised that Lancaster would be able to produce films 5 years after arriving in Hollywood. There was, however, one caveat. Before Lancaster could start producing, he had to prove himself as an actor, but that didn't take him long at all. Lancaster's first film was The Killers, which cemented 2 Hollywood careers, Lancaster's and his co-star Ava Gardner's. The film was a commercial and critical success and is considered a classic. Lancaster was an instant star, and he never had to play a supporting role. While filming The Killers, Lancaster got some personal news. Burt Lancaster found out that his girlfriend, Norma Anderson, was pregnant. Without thinking much about it, Lancaster came up with a plan. He had enough money for an abortion, but Anderson had no intention of ending her pregnancy. Her religious beliefs wouldn't let her. Lancaster was in a bind. His star was rising, but this illegitimate child could ruin everything. What was he going to do? At this time, Lancaster was still under contract with Universal Pictures, and they didn't want a leading man with an illegitimate child, so the studio took control of the situation, which was never a good sign. The couple had a quickie wedding ceremony in Arizona. Meddling behavior like this probably made Lancaster even more convinced that he should produce his own work and get out of the studio system. Burt Lancaster's first attempt producing his own movies immediately started a controversy. Even before the end of the opening credits, you see, the film had a very violent title, Kiss the Blood Off My Hands. Graphic. Small U.S. towns and countries, such as Canada and Australia, couldn't handle the goriness on the marquee. Lancaster switched the title to The Unafraid for those regions, and it went on to become a modest box office success. Even though Kiss the Blood Off My Hands ran into some controversy, it did something quite revolutionary. Until this time, most actors were stuck as a cog in the studio system. They had little or no control over the type of movies they did or the roles they got. Lancaster was one of the first actors of his era to actually produce films as well. Burt Lancaster's career was seriously taking off, and this fact may have gone to his head. On the set of the 1952 swashbuckler The Crimson Pirate, Lancaster's behavior was making the director and crew seasick. He was completely unmanageable, overbearing, crass, and all around unpleasant. But Lancaster's behavior was not the only problem during the filming of The Crimson Pirate. Something even darker was brewing behind the scenes. The 1950s was a strange time in Hollywood. Politicians were on the lookout for what they considered communist threats. The Crimson Pirate came under suspicion not because of Lancaster himself, but the lines he said in the film. Apparently, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover didn't like the monologue that Lancaster delivered in praise of simple working men. He thought it made the character sound like a communist pig. Since Lancaster was both an actor and a producer on the film, the FBI marked him as a potential communist, a mark that would follow him to the grave, and, as we'll see, beyond it. Lancaster was still married to Anderson, but was rumored to be unfaithful. In fact, there are stories about him and a platoon of makeup girls and production assistants. Some reports even place him in the arms of Marlene Dietrich. Women who met Lancaster seemed to fall under his spell. Well, that phenomenon was about to include not just the women he met, but every woman in America, and probably a lot of the men as well. In 1953, Burt Lancaster shot a scene that would cement his place in motion picture history. In From Here to Eternity, Lancaster kisses Deborah Kerr in Hawaii while waves crash around and even over them. This scene sent filmgoers swooning and immortalized Lancaster and Kerr, but it almost didn't happen. The beach makeout scene wasn't in the original script for the film. In fact, the scene was meant to be shot somewhere else entirely, and with the actors standing up. At the last minute, it was Lancaster himself who suggested taking it all to the beach and going horizontal. Director Fred Zinnemann loved the idea, and the rest, as they say, is history. Lancaster knew a lot was riding on the infamous beach scene. He wanted the kiss to look as convincing as possible. He also wanted to look his best in his Speedo. It turns out that between takes, Lancaster would pump up his muscles by jogging on the spot or doing push-ups. He also did some serious manscaping, which wasn't a common practice at the time. While rolling around in the surf, something happened between the two actors, according to Lancaster. However, according to Kerr, there was some attraction between the two, but it didn't go any further than that. We'll never know the truth, but one thing is certain: the on-screen chemistry between these two was undeniable. But the filming of From Here to Eternity wasn't all smooth sailing and makeout sessions for Lancaster. Apparently, his co-star Montgomery Clift intimidated him, so much so that in their first scene together, you can see Lancaster shaking. Lancaster's anxiety was also possibly responsible for his difficult behavior during filming. He became so preoccupied with his lines and camera angles that he finally made the film's usually mild-mannered director snap. One day, while Lancaster was being particularly difficult, Fred Finneman told him to go screw himself. Despite the difficulties on set, Burt Lancaster received a Best Actor nomination from the Academy for From Here to Eternity. But so did his co-star Montgomery Clift. Surely this meant that one of them would win. Or did it? Sometimes Academy voters have trouble choosing when the ballot contains two stars from the same picture. In this way, Lancaster and Clift canceled each other out, which left William Holden with the statue for Stalag 17. Meanwhile, Lancaster's production company was digging up gold. 1955's Marty, which starred Ernst Borgnine as an unattractive loser who falls for, well, another unattractive loser, became a critical success. The film ended up being one of the few films to ever win both the Academy Award for Best Picture and the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Lancaster didn't appear in the film, and his reason why was completely mean-spirited. As Lancaster put it, who wants to see a movie about two ugly people? In 1960, Lancaster played a con artist preacher in Elmer Gantry, and the Academy took notice once again. Even though he was up against legends Laurence Olivier and Spencer Tracy, Lancaster took home the trophy for Best Actor. After a shaky start, Lancaster's acting chops had finally matured, just in time too, because when Lancaster wasn't acting, he was busy lying to his wife. We've heard about Lancaster and his countless flings, but frequent co-star Shelley Winters claims to have had more than a fling. In her 1980 autobiography, Winters said she had a 2-year love affair with Lancaster while he was still married to Anderson. Lancaster never said anything about having an affair with Winters, but another biography tells us a different story entirely. Hitchcock staple Farley Granger wrote in his 2007 memoir that he and Lancaster saved Winters' life. While Lancaster was dating Winters, she allegedly overdosed on sleeping pills and booze. Lancaster and Granger came to the rescue and got her the help she needed. Winters owed Lancaster her life, but ended up dumping him for a shocking reason. While Winters was allegedly dating Lancaster, she heard some upsetting news. His wife was pregnant. This led Winters to the upsetting conclusion that Lancaster was cheating on her with his own wife. Apparently, Winters could only accept Lancaster as a cheater when he was with her, so she ended the relationship. However, if Winters believed all the rumors about Lancaster, she had much more to worry about than him cheating with his own wife. In 1960, a revealing report emerged about a raid on a Hollywood mansion. It turns out that the owner of the mansion was hosting lewd parties catered to gay men. Even though the mansion was highly secure, photographers secretly snapped shots of the partygoers having all-male orgies. The attendees allegedly included Rock Hudson, Burt Lancaster, an admiral, and 250 Marines. Lancaster was a strong advocate for the rights of African Americans. He was in France filming The Train when the March on Washington was going to take place. He managed to get leave from the shooting schedule and, in spite of his fear of flying, flew to Washington for the march. Then, the day after, Lancaster turned around and flew back. His phobia of air travel couldn't stop him from supporting a just cause. In 1973, then-President Richard Nixon made his infamous enemies list. Because Lancaster was vocal in the support of civil rights and minorities in America, the Republican president saw him as a threat. Lancaster, however, was in good company. Others on the list included Jane Fonda, Paul Newman, and even the EGOT-winning subversive, Barbra Streisand. The movie Airport was one of the first of a long string of star-studded disaster movies to descend on theaters. Lancaster appeared with, among others, Dean Martin and Jacqueline Bisset. It certainly wasn't a disaster for Lancaster. His name appeared above the film's title, and he received 10% of the rather Boeing-sized profits. But was he happy with it? Not in the slightest. Lancaster later called the film the worst piece of junk ever made. When Lancaster was 63 years old, he made a humble announcement. According to him, he was now too old to play a romantic lead. Well, it seems that Hollywood didn't quite agree. In 1980, he appeared in the gangster drama Atlantic City, where he portrayed an older suitor of Susan Sarandon, who was 34 at the time. Critics also took note of his performance. He won the Los Angeles and New York Film Awards and received his final nomination for Best Actor, which he lost to Henry Fonda. When movie heartthrob and Lancaster's friend Rock Hudson got his AIDS diagnosis, Lancaster joined the fight against the disease. Hudson later turned to Lancaster to deliver his last words to Hollywood. It was a jam-packed and emotional crowd who heard Lancaster recite Hudson's message of sorrow and hope. When Hudson finally lost his life, Lancaster was the only male celebrity at the funeral. It was Lancaster's own health that was next on the line. After a coronary bypass operation, Lancaster almost literally jumped off the operating table and got back to work. He only waited 6 months before filming Little Treasure with Margot Kidder and Ted Danson in 1984. Even though he still had a heart condition, he continued to appear in film and television, that is, until Hollywood saw him as a liability. Lancaster wanted to continue acting, but in Hollywood, money is always the bottom line. He was all set to play the lead in 1988's Old Gringo when Columbia Pictures took a pause. The increased insurance needed for the ailing star would make Lancaster's involvement too expensive. Lancaster got the axe and Gregory Peck replaced him. Luckily, there was another studio more than willing to foot the bill. Universal welcomed him in the baseball movie Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner. There were, however, signs that Lancaster was getting on in age. For example, he mistook his co-star Timothy Busfield for an assistant and did the unthinkable. He sent him on all kinds of errands. Lancaster realized his mistake when he had to act in a scene with Busfield. Field of Dreams was Lancaster's final role for the big screen. It wasn't, however, the end of his performance in general. At the ripe age of 77, Lancaster married a woman almost 30 years younger than him. In 1980, the star hooked up with 48-year-old Susan Scher, a television production coordinator. This marriage lasted until the end of Lancaster's life, which sadly wasn't a very long time. In 1980, Lancaster was visiting a friend in Orange County when he suffered a stroke. This incident sent Lancaster into the hospital and then into self-imposed seclusion. In his condo, Lancaster preferred the company of his new wife and not many other people. 4 years later, Lancaster passed away, with his wife by his side. In 2000, 6 years after his passing, the FBI released new documents about Burt Lancaster. Back in the 1950s, J. Edgar Hoover was keeping a close eye on Lancaster, especially his private life. The information pointed to Lancaster having affairs with many men and even being a predator. Whether we can trust this information is another story. Hoover could have made everything up to further implicate Lancaster, who he saw as a dangerous communist. Even outside the FBI, rumors of Lancaster's homosexuality continued to proliferate. Most of them come from Lancaster's acute attention to staying fit and his preference for male secretaries over female ones. The other, maybe more telling proof, is the number of times he visited Rock Hudson's home, where gay orgies allegedly took place frequently. Even though Lancaster's alleged gay lifestyle was almost completely under wraps, some people say that he and Rock Hudson may have started something still with us today. The idea of being openly gay, and set the tone for gay men and women to come out and live their lives on their own terms. Hollywood insiders have a habit of protecting the secrets of their own, so we may never know the absolute truth about Lancaster's personal life. However, his many spectacular on-screen performances will continue to be admired for generations. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe for more fascinating content.